üzerine özellikle yoğunlaşacağız şimdi ve Yeni Fikri Mülkiyet Kanunu'nun getirdikleri ve aynı zamanda teknoloji transfer ofislerinin sürdürülebilirliği ile ilgili olacak bu oturumlarımız. Moderasyon için de sözü Destek Global Yönetim Kurulu üyesi Sayın Ersin Derebil'e veriyorum. Buyurunuz.
Thank you so much. Okay, my question. Our team is ready to start. We are not like to be invited here just to take time and also to save your time before the lunch, because also there's another panel afterwards. Now, dear guests, it's our privilege and great pleasure for us to be with you. Now, I have together with two distinguished speakers, panelists, Mark and Patrick is with us. Let me, sorry. Okay, on the screen, of course, I will not read all through their CVs, but believe me, they are really very, they have extensive experience and expertise in technology transfer, especially Patrick has also great information, great knowledge for the for the industry, university, and government side collaboration projects. On the other hand, Mark, apart from his experience, his expertise in technology transfer, he's also an inventor. But it was, I think, 16 years ago. But I wrote about 50 billion US dollars per year, something. Was it correct?
It's an entire country by itself. No, it's about $30 million a year.
$30 million, yes, yeah. That's why
you've eaten my inventions, so we'll save that for later.
That's why, frankly, believe me, we can cover all the areas, especially for the ownership and the legal matters at the time. Now, I will be very quick. Now, here. No, not mine.
No. Yeah.
Here. Sorry, I need my glasses for the for the far parts. Okay. Now, this year has been a great year for Turkey, especially for the intellectual property legislation. 10th of January, we welcomed industrial property law. It was very, very important, a long awaited law for us. And then regulations and other legal issues continued. Especially, we are now waiting for the IP regulations for higher educational institutes from YÖK, from Council of Higher Education. When we welcome also that regulation, I think most of the parts which all TTOs are looking for will be completed. Hopefully, it will be published soon. Now, regarding the intellectual property protection, one of the major changes in the industrial property law, as all you know, was the cancellation of professor's privilege. That's why now university owns the inventions, and when we quickly look at the process, invention disclosure process, as you all may know, the disclosures from the academic portal, from the inventors, should be given promptly in writing to the unit appointed by the higher education institute. I will say university, please excuse me for that. I will not say higher education institute. And everything here is really bound to, very strict bound to deadlines. When a disclosure is made, then clock ticking. First, for example, within 4 months, the university or the TTO should respond to the inventor about the ownership, if the university will hold the ownership right or not. That's why 4 months is the most critical one. The second critical one, 2 months, just after the disclosure, because within 2 months, the TTO experts or the university personnel should ask the inventors to complete their disclosure if anything is missing in the disclosure. Afterwards, it will not be possible. And then everything goes very well and university holds the ownership. Then another due date starts, 4 months. Within the 4 months from the right ownership request, a patent application should be filed. And this can be delayed 2 months, of course, by having the prior consent with the inventors, with the agreement between the university and inventors. Now, here, especially, I would like to emphasize during the disclosure form, inventors' information, right distribution ratio, any claim for free invention. It looks so simple, but believe me, not. It was about 2 years ago. We were talking with a TTO manager abroad, and they were really successful, about $10 million US for licensing incomes per year. And she told me that they were suffering from 2 facts, 2 problems. First, the disagreements among the inventors during the disclosure period, before anything else. And then another disagreement among the all parties during the revenue sharing stage. That's why now we are putting these issues on the table, and we will talk about the rights for the ownership, and starting with our first debate. Sorry, ownership, and I will stop talking now. We have very dear, distinguished guests, and my first question to Mark, with regard to ownership of University of Inventions, what are the major problems which TTOs face, and how successful TTOs handling them? This is the general window. Now, how should we understand the ownership issue, ownership title?
So, I'm going to give a very brief description of what I've already seen on the screen a few times, BIDOL, which is a US-based law that has influenced tech transfer internationally. But I'm going to tell you what it really says, not what you might hear what it actually means. BIDOL has basically two parts. The first is that universities are allowed to take title of inventions if they want to, which is what the law in Turkey was adjusted to. That's it. You don't have to take it if you don't want to, but that there's a registration and a requesting process through the US government to gain ownership of the invention. And the second, and this is probably the most misunderstood part, is that the universities have to have a policy on how they're going to manage the ideas. That's it. It doesn't say anything else. You can have a policy that says you're going to give it all away. That's fine. You can have a policy that says your faculty own it all. That's fine. You can have a policy that says your university owns it. That's fine too. In practice, most US universities have taken the role of the way that the law was adjusted in Turkey, that the universities take title and take ownership. But just to be clear, it doesn't have to be that way. One of the guests visited Wisconsin, I think, the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, WARF, which is the oldest technology transfer organization in the United States. The University of Wisconsin's ownership policy is that the faculty owns the invention. But WARF is so good at what they do that the faculty volunteer to assign their rights to the university. But they can still go off and do it themselves if they want to. Rockefeller University is also the same. And so the reason that I bring that up is that I get to travel a little bit and talk about tech transfer and policy and practice. And what I find is that Bayh-Dole is usually seen as this is the answer, this is the way it's done, but that there's lots of flexibility within that process. And so the trick is, for ownership, is to understand what resources the institution has or doesn't have, and to make sure that both the policy and then the practice of the policy, which is usually the missing piece, how you implement the policy is the part that is harder, that those things match. So if you have the university have ownership, then there needs to be a staff that knows what they're doing. They're ready to take on that role and responsibility. If the university doesn't want to take ownership, then that doesn't have to be there. So it's more of a, the US universities are changing a little bit more to policy or practices that fit their university better than to say there is one general way of doing this.
Mm-hmm. Then Patrick, how can you summarize the ways to assign the ownership in universities, for example? Is there any different approach for that?
Well, in fact, yes, you're right. As you say, there's the rule, and there's the practical problem you have to face to apply the rule. The first one for me is to detect, to identify the invention, the famous problem of the disclosure of the invention, because in many cases, more than 50%, the survey observed that many inventions haven't been disclosed. Why? Because, well, the researcher, well, sometimes he doesn't want to disclose because he thinks it will be a waste of time. He will enter in a very complex administrative procedure, and but also many researchers, they don't see that they have discovered something. They need, because they are in their research, they are in their corridor, and they don't see what kind of invention they have done. So it's very useful that the people of TTO, the PhD students, they have a sort of external look to say, hey, this is something, this is an invention, and you have to disclose it. So there is cultural and practical thing. The other problem, which is it's a growing problem, is the multiplicity of inventors. Most of the time now, there is not only one inventor to one invention. There are multiple inventors, and not only faculty members, but also high qualified students who work with the faculty. And you have to, well, so who will disclose the invention and under what inventors? And there are famous cases in US of dispute between inventors. But what I mean is you need, in that case, to have very transparent procedure and rule to say, okay, in that case, you must do that. It's what you say. You need a rule, whatever the rule is. But you need a rule to people to be clear with themselves and with the institution to work.
And those changes have to happen. I think I'm missing here. There you go. And those policies have to be in place before things happen. So the cases that you referred to in the US were examples. I'm going to, and I don't know how the translation will work because I'm going to be specific with language, I'm sorry, is the Stanford case was about whether the faculty member agreed that they would assign the invention or had already assigned the invention based on the wording of the policy that they signed. So this is in the last 3 years in the United States, the language is saying, you know, faculty X does hereby assign, meaning now and all the way in the future, anything that will happen, instead of what it used to say is we will. When something comes up, we'll go ahead and do that. And so those are important distinctions of how you do the assignments, is having to do it up front before anything has happened, for things that have not yet occurred. That's the safest, best policy because you're getting someone to agree to something when there's nothing at stake, which is the best time to get them to agree to things when they can't disagree with you.
Okay.
Yeah. Actually, there is very important point here to note for all TTOs. For example, as Patrick emphasized, as many as 50% of the patentable innovations are not disclosed by researchers to their universities' TTOs. Sure. And I believe it is 70 to 60% in Turkey. That's why we are looking for a treasure, okay? And this is actually your difficulty. This is very important. Now, for the second debate, let's continue with the, let's continue with the revenue sharing between the university researchers and TTU. How should we know about the revenue sharing? First, Patrick, my first question to you. What is your sayings about the revenue sharing, the problems associated with the parties, especially universities, suffer from?
What the different survey says, whatever in Europe or in US, is there is an obvious and positive link between the revenue given to the researcher on the department and their university and the importance of invention disclosure and patenting and licensing. There is certainly a positive relationship. What we know also is that there is a very great diversity in the percentage given to each of the member of the chain of monetization. The share of the researcher could go from quite nothing, but generally around 30%, but up to 80%. And the most, for example, KU Leuven in Belgium, which is one of the greatest TTO, which earn a lot of money, well, he give 87% to the researcher, and the researcher has his own budget with which he can build and buy materials and do a lot of things. On the other side, the share of the TTO could be zero, and in many cases it is zero after reimbursement of the cost. But there is no relationship for this case between the share of the TTO on the success of the whole organization. Certainly the most important thing is what amount is given to the researcher on all the university department, but even with that, what is important is to have very clear rules, and everybody knows before, and you know in which frame you are working in. I think.
Okay, thank you. What about the same for the U.S.?
So it's a little different, and I think it's the next slide.
Yeah.
So in the U.S., roughly we split the income a third, a third, a third. That is a gross overgeneralization. It's close to what we do at the University of New Hampshire. But I want to point out a problem with what we just talked about. So on one hand, you say, give as much of the incentive to the faculty member as possible. And on the other hand, we say the TTOs have to be self-sufficient. That doesn't work. Unless you have all the money up front, if you go to KU Leuven, right, who has several tens of millions of euro of royalty income, it's fine once you're successful. But when you start, which is where we are here, you're giving away most of your income if you follow the things that we suggested. So it becomes challenging in the startup phase of a TTO and in the startup phase of an adjustment in policy to find the balance between where you get the money. Because in general, you start with a government incentive. They'll say, let's prompt this process, let's put a bunch of money into the people and into the effort and to the work, but please be profitable very shortly. Yet, if you don't give enough of the incentive of the return to the faculty, who are the ones creating your flow, they're not going to participate either. And that's where a lot of the application, the practice of tech transfer, where it tends to go wrong. And so just like in a startup company, they say everything takes twice as long and costs 4 times as much. I think the same is true in technology transfer out of early stage research, because it's going to take a lot longer to have the ideas reach the market, be accepted by the market, advanced by the companies, and then brought into a product that people will purchase that will generate income that flows back. In a medical application, that's 12 to 15 years, if it works. in a engineering and physical science, it can be a lot quicker. And so I think there's an undescribed valley of death in tech transfer, which is that 5 to 15 year period where you're very likely not to have enough of the early stage startup capital, and yet don't have enough successes of the things that you've done to bring in the income to show that you're successful.
Thank you. At this stage, some of our recommendations can be, for example, please ensure that the inventors receive some early income as a reward, perhaps 50% of first 20,000 US dollars, for example, just as an example.
Just give them a taste to know they've been successful.
And as a second point, please focus on cost recovery, helps reinvesting in new ideas, creating partial evergreen fund. And maybe the last but not least, policies should treat students and faculty equally to reduce disagreements. I think we can summarize in this way.
Right.
And as the most difficult part of our debates, now we will concentrate on the financial sustainability of the TTOs. Now my question goes to both panelists. As of all TTOs close concern, what should they know in order to survive financially until they become a self-sustainable establishment? For a miracle, I mean.
Could you put, yeah. Yes, to emphasize what just Mark says, that, well, the financial model of the TTO is quite well known. The operating cost is quite stable and little increasing over time. But the revenue at the beginning is 0, and well, it takes time to increase the revenue. So that's make that the break-even point come after some years. Well, it depends on the sectors, the domain, but roughly it's around 10 years. And to compensate the negative result you have at in the first year, you need to expect around 20 years to be really profitable. But this is a long-term financial model, and it's quite normal for invention and research valorization, because it's what we find in universities, basic research, so they are very early compared to the market. The other things is, in fact, the distribution of revenue and positive result is very highly skewed. There are very, very few universities, around 10% of the university, which represent 80% of the licensing revenue. And in this packet, the biomedical sectors represent itself between 80 or 90%. So this concentration of good result make the financial exercise of the TTO quite difficult. Well, this is the present situation. It could change in the future, but this is the present situation.
Yeah. Actually, you emphasize that the revenue model for a TTOs, especially, it takes about 10 years. 10 years to reach financial autonomy.
Yeah.
And 20
Well,
to be
it's an average.
profitable. But we should be quicker, believe me, for that. And
If you can figure it out, let me know.
now maybe we need some catalyzing advisors, pillars for that to improve for that. And the case for the US.
This is financial only.
Yeah.
This is truth.
Yeah, and I want to emphasize what Patrick said. So feel free to, I'm going to make exercise. We're going to raise our hands. So how many people in the audience work for a company, a TTO, an investor that is not in the life sciences?
It's a question.
Yes. How many? I was going to say everyone is in the life sciences.
Ask the life sciences.
No.
Only ask the Einstein.
Not life sciences.
Not life sciences.
Engineering, physical sciences. There's a few. So I'm sorry, because financially it's just really difficult to make that work. But one of the suggestions that I'm going to make, which is really very different, is to try to look at what is in your local environment to find what's going to work for you. So I look at technology transfer as being very local. It's not national and it's not international at first. It's local. Because as this push comes to create startup companies, those startup companies, yes, you hear about they'll follow the money wherever it goes, and that's true. But generally speaking, a startup company will stay within a few kilometers of where they're planted. And the data in the US is pretty dramatic. It's something like 83% of all startup companies live within 10 kilometers of where they were founded. So think about what that does for your backyard. So at the University of New Hampshire, for example, we do a lot of non-exclusive licensing. And you don't hear that in a lot of tech transfer. It's let's do a big exclusive license, let's make a lot of money. We do a lot of non-exclusive licenses. So last 15, I'm sorry, UNH did 190 licenses. So we did more licenses than MIT and Harvard combined. But we did them in volume. We made $5,000 a pop per license, but we did one technology where we licensed it 30 times for $5,000. So we made $150,000 versus trying to find one licensee that's worth $150,000. So we did it on volume because that's what we had. We didn't have life science, we didn't have biotech. We had computer software, computer hardware, engineering, so much quicker to market. So you can't spend 8 months negotiating a license if the product is only going to have a life cycle of 5 years. So get it done fast. And I guess I'll stop there for the moment and to just make sure you can do what's good for you in your local area first, and then try to do the bigger, broader things second. And then do you want to talk about this a little bit?
Well, it was your slide, but well, no, perhaps you can.
Okay.
Yeah. So
yeah.
Well, actually, go to the last.
No.
Yeah, that was.
Yes.
So
conclude with that.
yeah.
Right.
So to look at tech transfer as a way to make money probably won't work. You'll make money. It's fine. But focusing on the use of the technology and not the financial return of the technology up front is probably a little more healthy. Because before the money happens, jobs are created, ideas are proliferated, and the impact of those ideas goes very broadly. And then if you could skip back one slide, one thing that Autumn is doing now is talking about what are those other metrics that are relevant for tech transfer. So everybody picks money because money is easy to count, and we even have exchange rates, so we know, how you're doing relative to other countries. But it's probably the worst output because the universities aren't responsible, and hospitals, for commercializing. So we are accountable for the commercialization, but not responsible for the commercialization. That's not that great. We at UNH, we look at licensing, number of licenses as a relevant performance indicator because we can control that. And so I'm having a discussion with the president of my university right now to say, how can we de-emphasize the financial return and emphasize the existence of our technology in the world? And so what Autumn has done is looked at things like jobs, economic return, adjustment to GDP, new firm formation, even that we're getting to tax revenue in your local community, which I think before you could be 10 years before you make a royalty dollar, but you might have 30 employees paying taxes, increasing the benefits of the people in your community. So I will stop.
Yes. That's good.
On the other side, well, the financial sustainability of the TTO is very, very important. Perhaps you can go on the, The first reason is that public money is no more abundant as it were before. So we have to select the target of the beneficiary of public money. And if we, I'm speaking perhaps on the side of the governmental side, but there is no reason why the innovation is at the core of all the economy now. All the economy call for innovation. So what is the reason for the very center of innovation creation will not find its economic model? So there is a lack of public money, and for the reason of on the TTO, if they want to survive, they must be autonomous. They must find their self-sustainability in the long term. I don't mean about gaining high profit. It's not the problem. The problem is they must being able to live and to survive in the long term. So they have to find their own resources to live. They cannot count on public subsidiary because there will be less and less public subsidiary. On the other side, I say the economic model of the society is founded on innovation. So the creator on the babysitter of innovation, they must earn their life unless there is no logic in this economic system.
Okay. Right. Now I think time is up for us and for the next panel. Now it's time. Thank you so much for your advices. Now it's time for your questions. Please feel free to ask questions, especially for these issues. Please, Les.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. My name is Ender Ostas. I work for a software company. So my question goes to Mark. When you said technology transfer is a local business, could you elaborate on that a bit more? Because almost everywhere the startups are always encouraged to go global and do global business. And when you said technology transfer is a local business, it's a bit, especially when you think about the technoparks around Turkey, almost 50% are technology companies, not non-life science.
Right. So it's about the advancement of technology and how it happens. So obviously, you want a technology to be distributed as widely as you possibly can, but you don't start a company and then move to Crete because that's where your #1 customer is. The action, the early stage, the support of that company happens in your backyard. And especially, and the term technology transfer probably means about 30 different things, depending on what country you're in. So what I'm referring to is university intellectual property that comes out and creates a business. Proximity is really important for those kinds of technologies because the inventor, as we talked about the sharing, is at the university. And we know about our faculty, I'm sorry if there are faculty in the audience, don't like to leave the university that much. So the closer you can get, and there are studies in the US that show that the closer the proximity the accelerator, incubator, technopark is to the university, the higher the success rate of that organization is. And so what I meant was the starting point, 0 to 2 or 3 years, is in your backyard. And then it grows and it goes wherever it has to go from there. Does that make sense?
Okay. Okay. Afterwards, I will only take one question because of the... Okay.
Hello, my name is Serhat from Erciyes TTA. I will have a question for both of our guests. Mark mentioned that the revenue sharement of the faculty and the company and TTO, the faculty gets maximum 80% or something like that. And we had a new IP law here in Turkey, 6769, and it says 30% is the minimum rate that you must give to the faculty. But there is no upper limit. And this is a mistake, in my opinion, for our country, because we have bad instincts in our Eastern communities that if you are my close friend, then there is no upper limit for us. What's the situation in US and France? And what's your opinion? Should there be an upper limit for the revenue sharement or not? Thank you.
Well, in many countries, the regulation limits the percentage which is given to the researcher with different ceiling of amount. For example, in the ISIS Oxford example, the researcher have, for example, 80% up to a certain limit, and above this limit the percentage is lower and lower. But what is important is, as I said before, and Mark also, is that the rules are very clear and will not change for in each case. You must have the same rule, and the actors will manage the behavior in front of that rules.
Yeah, I don't know that it doesn't not make sense to have an upper limit, but I don't know that it does make sense, because it really is what's the financial model of the TTO. So in the US, we call tech transfer the great unfunded mandate, because you talked about, you have to be profitable. The government in the United States gives not $1 to the people doing tech transfer. The government in the US does not fund tech transfer at all, not $1. The universities fund it all. So if we're employees and my president says make money, then I'll make money. If my president says I don't care if you make money, then I still care if I make money, but the pressure isn't there. So I think there's a practical upper limit in terms of what has to get returned to the TTO for it to be sustainable, but what that number is, I don't know.
Çok teşekkür ediyoruz. Eklemek istediğiniz bir şey varsa buyurunuz.
Let's start for the next one.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
So I just go with that.
Thank you.
We will see you again, Mr. Sarum.
I get to stay, don't I?
Yeah.
Yes, please stay on behalf of us.
Çok teşekkürler.